Today on the Dugs, we're returning to our Three Strikes series, telling three themed baseball stories, this time focusing on the three craziest baseball players of all time. If you stick around to the end, in addition to earning my respect, you'll hear about a legendary pitcher spending his retirement in a fallout shelter, how to land in the Hall of Fame despite the fact that you can't overcome your need to chase fire trucks and play with puppies, the health benefits of sprinkling marijuana on your pancakes, and much, much more, including a very special guest in Can 23. The baseball gods have taken Shohei's arm away, but YouTube's one of the best ways to deny reality. And the Dugs have uploaded a new video. Welcome back to the Dugs, where everything we do is an excuse to tell a lot of baseball stories and a lot of jokes. Before jumping into our three primary stories, there were so many near misses that we couldn't justify blowing all of them out to a full story. However, they were all too interesting to just let die on the cutting room floor, so we've brought Hamish Hamden back in to help out. Just as he is the honorable mention to my title of best half-drunk baseball YouTuber in the world, he'll be bringing us the honorable mentions. Take it away, Hamish.
Yes, Hamish Hamden here. Like Johann Sebastian and Chili's baby, I am back. There are many great Manny Ramirez stories, but my favourite is told by Dustin Pedroia. Fun fact, when I was discussing this with Johnny Paprika, he later messaged me to spell Dustin Pedroia's name phonetically so I wouldn't mispronounce it. Like I don't know how to pronounce Great Red Sox, like Pedroia, Garciapara, Ruff. Anyway, the story goes that Dustin had finally got into the veteran's good graces and Manny approached his locker with a branded Rolex box as a supposed gift. Before Pedroia could open it, Manny inexplicably swung his bat at the box and put a big old dent in it. Oh Manny, the old fake Rolex in a box trick, eh? Nope. When Dustin opened the box, he found a Rolex. Completely smashed and useless, but 100% genuine. The beginning of Bill Fall's pitching career got off to a rough start as he just couldn't relax on the mound. The solution to this was he learned how to put himself in hypnotic trance before games. But instead of doing the old party trick of making the hypnotized quack like a duck, he was hypnotized to trust his stuff. How about Yankees pitchers Fritz Peterson and Mike Kekich? They traded wives. No, not in the swinging 70s kind of way, they legitimately, permanently swapped spouses. Children. Pets! Everything! At one point, Kekich was nervous Fritz would be traded, as a connection to Fritz was the only means he could see his biological children. You know, Johnny, I haven't been on this channel for a while. I don't want to blow all my steam on the beginning of the video. I'll be back later to bring you the rest of the honourable mentions.
No circumstances are you permitted to. Squirrel!
Well, I can handle alligators.
Put it on my tab.
Sucker.
There were many directions I could have taken this video. The various honorable mention segments speak to that fact. However, none of these directions were ever going to be able to exclude the grand jewel that is Rube Waddell. I didn't get a clean read on his full upbringing, but two stories probably paint a good enough picture. Number one, his arm strength was said to have originated from throwing rocks at birds either while working on his family's property or while he was a child laborer in a mine or drilling site. And story number two, he once wandered to a local fire station at the age of 3 and apparently stayed there for several days. His tendency to wander off wasn't restricted to his childhood days. He once left in the middle of a game to go fishing. He missed spring training games to walk in a parade in Florida and wrestle alligators. If someone held up a puppy in the crowd, he would stop whatever he was doing and run over to play with it. Shiny objects were said to hypnotize him, and there are mixed reports on this, but he apparently had a habit of chasing down fire trucks should one pass him by. His erratic behavior drove managers crazy, but there's a spot for you in professional sports if you can perform. He received an interview with the Pittsburgh Pirates based on his reputation alone. But wait, this isn't the start to his story. Oh, they signed him, but at a preseason team dinner, he had the prestigious honor of sitting next to the manager, Patsy Donovan. Not sure what was said, but his release directly followed that meal. He got another start in 1898 with the Western League, but some sort of dispute over a fine saw him abandoning that team not long after he joined it. The Pirates player manager, Fred Clark, decided to give Waddell a third chance. That lasted, 5 minutes, before Clark said it was A-okay for other teams to borrow him. Connie Mack, who last time we were talking about on this channel, was falling asleep in the dugout and attempting to sub in players that hadn't played with the club for over a decade, decided to take the Pirates up on their offer. He was nothing short of dominant, racking up 10 wins in a little over a month, and the Pirates were forced to stick their peg in their mouth and admit they made a mistake. So, they asked for him back, and Pirates manager Clark was able to tolerate him for the rest of the season. But May of the following season was as far as he could make it. He was sold to the Chicago Orphans and bounced around for a few years, becoming hugely popular wherever he went before before Connie Mack once again resurfaced to try to convince him to stay in a more permanent home. Waddell was convinced and headed to the Philadelphia Athletics. Connie had heard of the pitcher's prior exploits, so just to make sure the new signee actually remembered he had signed with the team, he went ahead and sent a couple Pinkertons to escort the man to the team. Somewhere in this mess, he managed to get married 3 times, or at least we think it's 3, as Waddell would frequently forget his marriage tally when asked, but he was released from those contracts as well due to quote-unquote gross neglect of duty. You may be wondering how a man could pack such a resume into a relatively short life, as he died at the young age of 37. The answer, my friends, is efficiency. Biographer Lee Allen summed up one of Waddell's years as follows. Waddell began the 1903 season sleeping in a firehouse at Camden, New Jersey, and ended it tending a bar in a saloon in Wheeling, West Virginia. In between those 2 events, he won 22 games for the Philadelphia Athletics, toured the nation in a melodrama called The Stain of Guilt, courted, married, and became separated from May Wynn Skinner of Lynn, Massachusetts, saved a woman from drowning, accidentally shot a friend through the hand, and was bitten by a lion. I know you all heard that and asked yourselves, wait, he did theater? Yep, sure did, and it was critically acclaimed as well, despite the fact that Waddell couldn't memorize his lines. He reportedly delighted the critics while just winging it every night. I couldn't find much more on the highlights, but the one detail I did turn up was that Waddell lifted the actor playing the villain and threw him across the stage with ease. The Chicago Journal wrote, he is let out only 2 minutes in each scene and the ensuing repair bills are pretty bulky for even those 2 minutes. Rube's erratic behavior was at least partially explained by his love for alcohol. One story recounts how he and Cy Young both went the distance in a 20-inning game, which naturally became a legendary tale in the world of baseball. A game ball used in this contest would surely become a prized possession. Well, prized enough to cover Rube's bar tab for a night at least, as the bartender ended up with the nice souvenir. However, there's actually a question over which, if any, bartender ended up with an actual ball from the game, as it's said that Waddell presented several bartenders with balls that were supposedly from that game. Alcohol wasn't the end of him, however. It was a severe case of pneumonia that did him in the end. He got sick after standing in freezing cold water for hours while stacking sandbags in Kentucky in an attempt to save the small town of Hickman from a flood. He came into this world on a Friday the 13th and appropriately exited on April Fool's Day.
Yes, Johnny, just like to the future and in black, I'm back. Joe Charbonneau allegedly opened beer bottles with his eye socket, pulled his own tooth, then, quote-unquote, sterilized it with tobacco. He also fixed his own broken nose with a pair of pliers and a bottle of whiskey, removed a tattoo with a razor blade, and 8 lit cigarettes. This seems the kind of behaviour that, while still surprising, would not be shocking if it had occurred with a 19th century ballplayer. Joe Charbonneau is currently 68 years old and did all of this in the early 80s while playing for Cleveland. Cleveland. Now there you go. Want more tales of debauchery? How about Len Konecki? He wasn't a habitual drinker, but he got sauced one night and boarded a flight to Detroit. He became belligerent, got into a series of fights, and at one point even knocked down a stewardess. As it turns out, the flight was only stopping in Detroit as a layover on its way to New York, so he was escorted off and told he could make the final leg of the journey once he had slept this off. Well, at some point he wakes up, and well before he slept it off, he's managing to talk his way onto a new, much smaller plane with a pilot and a pilot's friend who just happened to be a daredevil skydiver called The Bat. Now, we can only assume Konecki thought The Bat was making fun of his profession, because once the flight got up in the air, Konecki wasted no time in starting a fight and winning with The Bat. But not content to stop there, he attempted to wrestle control of the plane away from the pilot. Now, the pilot was considerably larger than The Bat, and eventually managed to subdue Len by bashing his head in with a fire extinguisher. Upon landing, Len was pronounced dead, which is the sort of feel-good stories we like to bring you here at the Dugs. Johnny, that's all I've got for you this month. I'll return for the next videos where I will be pitching my Scottish football spin-off, The Dugouts. Until then, call me Adam, 'cause I'm done.
While you were still learning how to spell your name, I was being trained to conquer galaxies.
They say there's no sound in space, but Spaceman Lee didn't let that stop him from running his mouth. He was once cold-cocked by Greg Nettles in a fight, and Lee, who hadn't forgotten about the incident decades later when he ran into him, pointed out to Nettles that he had aged poorly and that he quote-unquote looked like a duvet cover. Not being able to let go of his grudges was a bit of a hallmark for the Spaceman. He played under Don Zimmer on the Red Sox in the 1975 World Series. The story goes that Zimmer disagreed with Bill's strategy of keeping the infielders in position for a double play, which then cost them said double play, keeping the inning alive for Tony Perez, who subsequently hit a home run. Well, as we've seen, Spaceman doesn't forget or forgive. In 1978, he became the leader of an intra-squad faction known as the Buffalo Heads. The Heads seemed to have one collective goal that held them together, making Don Zimmer's life as miserable as possible. He started by coining the nickname of Designated Gerbil for Zimmer, which I think there's a good quote in The Big Lebowski about. He claimed Don wouldn't know a good pitcher if it bit him in the ass. There were actually some notable members of the club, like Fergie Jenkins, Rick Wise, Dick Pohl, and Bernie Carbo. The group was so disruptive that it eventually led to the Sox releasing one of the Spaceman's best friends in Carbo. This was the beginning of a downward spiral between Zimmer and Spaceman, which eventually led to suspensions, Spaceman's claimed retirement, which didn't actually happen just yet, and his trade to the Montreal Expos. Now, the fact that Bill was able to rally several notable players to his corner does lend a little bit of credence to the question of whether Zimmer knew the difference between a sound baseball strategy and the nuts stuffed in his cheek pouches, but it's not as if Spaceman Bill Lee was the most reliable of narrators. When the league was going to start mandatory drug testing, he replied, "I've tested about all of them, but I wouldn't want to make it mandatory. The one drug I could turn up comment on was marijuana, which he sprinkled on his buckwheat pancakes. He claimed that weed made him impervious to bus fumes, allowing him to commute to baseball games via a brisk run." There's another incident, which I'm not saying is related to his drug use, but in 1980, he missed a solid chunk of time in the middle of the season when he fell out of a building onto an iron fence. His retelling of the incident claims that he was attempting to scale the building and tap on a friend's window. That injury, combined with the strike of 1981, combined with the fact that he just never could quite quit the habit of criticizing management and teammates, meant that his career ended shortly thereafter. That's fine, Bill had a lot of other activities to pass his days. Why, in 1987, he announced he would be running for President of the United States under the Rhinoceros Party. Now, if you've never read the Wikipedia page for the Rhinoceros Party, I suggest you drop what you're doing, unless it's feeding a baby, of course, and go over there right now. If you happen to be feeding a baby, I'll go through some of the highlights of their platforms throughout the years. They wanted to tow Antarctica north to the Arctic Circle so that if a Cold War ever broke out again, Canada would own all of the cold and therefore win. They wanted to provide a nuclear power plant to every family, including a healthy supply of lead underwear. They wanted to eliminate small businesses in favor of extra small businesses. The Rocky Mountains would be leveled. Canada should declare war on Belgium because a Belgian cartoon character, Tintin, killed a rhinoceros in one of his cartoons. Their top priority was national defense and education and employment and the environment, justice, national heritage, international relations, health, and public security. He actually did accept a serious nomination in 2016 when the Liberty Union Party asked him if he wanted to run for the governorship of Vermont. He had never heard of the Liberty Union Party before, but he didn't let that stop him from accepting the nomination. He received 8,912 votes, accounting for 2% of the vote. These days, he's been hanging around the Savannah Bananas, which is essentially the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, so it's an absolute perfect fit. Okay, we've got a special guest on this edition of Three Strikes to bring this one home. He goes by the name of Cam23, and if you like when we talk about baseball history, you should really like it when an intelligent and sober YouTuber does it. His channel has most recently focused on insane numbers underappreciated players put up in their prime, and if that's too rosy for you, he'll also tell you about how Chris Davis the bed. Take it away, Cam.
First, they fatten us up with all those 2-for-1 pizza coupons. Then when we're too logy to put up a fight, they sell us off to the Red Cross, who removes our kidneys, which go back on the pizzas to start the process all over again.
There comes a time in most professional pitchers' lives where they come to realize they might be able to throw a ball professionally. For Steve Carlton, that moment may have been when he, as a boy, threw an axe at a bird and chopped its head clean off. Soon enough, he was signing a contract to play for the Cardinals, where he quickly became an elite pitcher after developing a killer slider. He just as quickly lost his touch with the pitch, and to get back on track, he did exactly what anyone would do in that situation. He started listening to a night watchman that people called by the single name of Briggs. Briggs wasn't a Goodwill Hunting pitching genius lurking in the shadows. No. He just liked philosophy. He claimed that Carlton's issues had a root in his concentration, and to that end, he began writing with advice several times a week that included snippets from philosophers Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. Despite taking pitching advice from long-dead philosophers, he was traded to Philadelphia, where he absolutely dominated. In 1972, he delivered a record of 27-10. Unfortunately, the other four members of the Phillies rotation were abysmal. The club went 59-97. If you're doing the math, that means that Carlton was credited with 46% of the club's wins, and those were the ones that the pen didn't screw him out of. He couldn't repeat this performance the following year and decided to deal with his struggles by refusing to talk to television reporters during a period known as the Great Silence. He'd still make radio appearances on occasion, but only under the condition that he would not be talking about baseball. It was during this era that Braves announcer Ernie Johnson remarked, "The two best pitchers in the National League that don't speak English, Fernando Valenzuela and Steve Carlton." Apparently, the Phillies' night watchmen were all subpar on their philosophy, so instead he turned to Gus Hoffling, a trainer. I guess he was a trainer. His solution to Carlton's problems weren't anything new, but rather attempting to kill all of the emotion inside of himself. This involved meditation, martial arts, shoving his pitching arm into a barrel of rice, and convincing the club to build him a $15,000 soundproof mood behavior room where, among other things, he would sit in silence and stare at a painting of waves for hours at a time. There were ups and downs, but he eventually put up eye-popping numbers over the course of his career, racking up over 300 wins and 4,000 strikeouts. Now that was partially due to not knowing when to stop. He played from 1965 to 1988. For the first 20 years of that, he was with two clubs, the Cardinals and the Phillies. But starting with the trade in 1986, he'd be a member of the Twins, White Sox, Giants, and Indians for the remaining 3 years of his career before the league gave up on him, as he just didn't have the stuff anymore. Silver lining though, he was credited as a World Series champion in 1987 with the Twins, but since nothing is straightforward with Steve Carlton, he was identified in a photograph where the club visited the president as an unidentified secret agent. It was during this period of time where he was being passed around like a pair of old gym shorts. Surely the league losing interest in him had nothing to do with the fact that he had consistently been north of 5 with his ERA after he turned 40. No, according to him, the Twins set him up to be released by not pitching him and then told other owners to keep their hands off. This was far from the last you'd hear from this conspiracy theorist. A reporter for the Philadelphia Magazine went out to talk to him in 1994 at his secluded mountain home in Durango, Colorado. Let's do a speed run of things he heard and learned on his trip. When asked about his choice of location, he replied, "I like it here because the people are spiritually tuned in." He then glanced sideways out of the corner of his eyes and continued, "They know where the lies fall." He says the revolution is coming, but can't quite narrow down who will start it. The Skull and Bones Society of Yale University, the International Monetary Fund, or the World Health Organization. The Russian and US governments fill the air with low-frequency sound waves meant to control us. The entire world is run by either M15 and M16 British intelligence agencies, or if not them, then 12 bankers that meet in Switzerland on occasion, or if not them, then a group of 300 people that meet at a round table in Rome. His phones work off of cellular microwave transmitters so that no one can tap his wires. The house, including the 7,000-foot storage cellar that sounds like a survivalist paradise, was entirely made out of concrete to keep the gamma radiation out. When a kid walked up to him and wished him a happy birthday, he blinked in a confused fashion and told her that he didn't celebrate birthdays. He used to not eat meat because of the thought of the blood, but then realized it was okay because carrot juice is like a carrot's blood, and that's not gross. Steve Carlton is 78 these days, and doing his best to do whatever his wife tells him.
Thank you, Cam23. We've got a link to his channel in our description, so go check him out. Before you do that, however, if you like what we've done today, subscribing to the channel, hitting the like button, and letting us know your thoughts in the comments are the best ways to help others find this channel. Did we miss a favorite crazy player or story of yours? Tell us about it in the comments. We'll be back soon with the resumption of our franchise cup, so go check out that playlist and catch up. Or go see the first installment of the 3 Strikes, where we talk about the 3 most interesting stories that involved fans of the game. As always, I've been Johnny Paprika, hoping all of your balls are fair and all of your wood is good. Good night, everybody!